For centuries, we've looked to heaven, prayed to God, to angels. We ask for guidance and protection. But for many, prayer travels in one direction. In the late 1500s, an English scholar believed something else was possible. He claimed to communicate with the beings beyond our realm. They taught him their language, and he wrote it down, letter by letter, word by word. He believed they were angels. They had to be angels, right? If you too communicate with forces beyond our realm, check out Pantheon, our brand inspired by myths, legends and folklore. We ship worldwide and are rated excellent on Trustpilot. Link in the description. For the man at the centre of this story, the pursuit of knowledge was a calling. His name was John Dee, and in the 16th century he was considered one of the most educated men in England. Dee lived during the Renaissance, a time when scholars believed the universe could be understood through careful study of nature, mathematics and the ancient texts. To many of these thinkers, science, religion and philosophy were different ways of approaching the same question. How does the universe actually work? A question Dee embraced completely. He studied mathematics, astronomy, geometry, navigation, optics and classical philosophy, fields that shaped the future. Mathematics allowed ships to cross oceans, astronomy allowed sailors to navigate the night sky. Knowledge of geography and cartography was beginning to reshape the political ambitions of nations. England stood at the beginning of an age of exploration, and Dee believed knowledge would determine who mastered it. His reputation eventually brought him to the orbit of Elizabeth I. Dee advised the Queen on matters of astrology and mathematics, and he even calculated the most favourable date for her coronation. But while Dee was respected as a scholar, his ambitions went much further than practical science. At his home in Mortlake on the banks of the River Thames, Dee assembled one of the largest private libraries in England. It contained thousands of books and manuscripts covering subjects from classical philosophy and mathematics to alchemy, theology, and the writings of thinkers like Pythagoras, Plato, and Hermes Trismegistus. For Dee, these works were fragments of a much larger puzzle. He believed that the universe was built on hidden order, an underlying structure waiting to be uncovered by those determined enough to search for it, and if that order truly existed, then somewhere behind the visible world there had to be intelligence guiding it. Dee believed angels were part of that architecture, messengers between the divine and the human world. And if that were the case, could they be contacted? For all of Dee's learning, there was one problem he couldn't solve on his own. He could study scripture, he could trace celestial movements, he could search ancient texts for hints of hidden knowledge, but none of that really gave him what he truly wanted, which was direct contact. He wanted to access them. That desire pushed him toward a practice known as scrying, a form of divination in which visions are sought through a reflective surface, most often a crystal or a polished stone or a black mirror. Variations existed for centuries tied to magic, prophecy and attempts to receive knowledge from beyond what we can see. What made Dee's use of it different was the seriousness with which he approached it, a structured attempt to establish contact with intelligence he believed was real. The man who made that possible was Edward Kelly. Kelly remains one of the strongest figures in the entire story because he stood in complete contrast to Dee. Where Dee was scholarly, disciplined and intellectually formidable, Kelly carried a far murkier reputation. He was younger, harder to read, and already associated with alchemy, spirit communication and dubious claims before entering Dee's world. Accounts of his life are full of uncertainty, rumour and suspicion. However, from this point onward, nearly everything Dee received depended on Kelly. He was the seer. During their sessions, Dee and Kelly would prepare the space carefully. Prayers were said, ritual purification mattered. It was sacred work, after all. Kelly would then gaze into a scrying stone or crystal, waiting for images to appear. Dee usually sat beside him, asking questions, listening and writing. Kelly described what he saw, Dee recorded it with painstaking attention. Dee never saw the angels himself. He heard them through Kelly. Every figure, every voice, every symbol, every command entered Dee's journal through the testimony of one man staring into a stone. Yet Dee treated these sessions with extraordinary seriousness. His records were detailed, methodical, and relentless. He noted dates, questions, responses, names, arrangements of letters, instructions, cosmological diagrams. Whatever was happening in that room, Dee believed it deserved to be captured with precision. At first, the communications followed a pattern that would have felt familiar within a religious framework. The beings identified themselves as angelic messengers. They spoke of divine matters, morality, order, and the fabric of creation. Dee believed he was receiving instruction from higher intelligences. This was never simply about curiosity. Dee was taking part in a restoration of sacred knowledge, something ancient and purposeful. It was revelation. They gave names. They gave sequences. They gave instructions that Dee recorded exactly as he heard them. Over time, the sessions grew more elaborate, more technical, more demanding. The material accumulated into patterns, ordered patterns, repeated forms, hierarchies. From now, Enochian magic starts to emerge piece by piece through repeated sessions. Dee's role in this process was vital. Kelly sought and spoke, but Dee preserved, organized, and pursued. He asked questions, he sought clarification, he treated the entire process as something that could be understood if it was recorded carefully enough. Without Dee, the visions would have vanished into rumour. Without Kelly, Dee would have no voices to record. Enochian magic developed from that partnership, uneasy, imbalanced, and completely dependent on trust. One man believed, one man saw, and between them, a body of material began to form that claimed to come from angels themselves. By the standards of the time, this didn't place Dee neatly outside religion. Europe still allowed room for the belief that the heavens communicated, but what made Dee's work unusual was the scale of what followed. The communications kept coming, the content kept expanding, and what first appeared as a search for wisdom gradually became something far more ambitious. A language was beginning to take shape. The first element Dee received was the alphabet. The angels revealed a sequence of letters, each with its own name and sound. Dee carefully copied the characters into his notebooks exactly as they were presented. The script looks nothing like the Latin alphabet used across Europe at the time. Each letter carries an unfamiliar form, almost geometric in its simplicity. In the material preserved in Dee's journals, the alphabet contains 21 letters, each with its own spoken name, which Dee believed to reflect its true sound in angelic speech. In this way, the alphabet functioned as both a written script and as a key to pronunciation. Once the alphabet had been established, words began to appear. Some were thought to be names, others looked like titles or ranks among the angels. Dee recorded these words with extraordinary care, often writing them down letter by letter as Kelly dictated them. Over time, a vocabulary began to accumulate, and certain words began appearing repeatedly across different sessions. What makes Enochian unusual is that the language appeared gradually through dialogue. Dee would ask questions, the angels would respond. New words would appear alongside familiar ones. Occasionally the angels would translate a phrase into English, offering Dee clues into meaning and context. From these fragments, scholars later attempted to reconstruct how the language might work. Some patterns emerged. Many Enochian words appear to follow consistent sound structures, suggesting a phonetic logic behind them. Certain grammatical patterns also appear in the longer passages recorded in Dee's notebooks, indicating that the language was more than a random collection of invented sounds. But the most important part of the language lies in the longer invocations known as the calls, sometimes referred to as the keys. These passages form the core of what Dee believed he had received. The calls are extended pieces of angelic speech delivered during the sessions and preserved in Dee's journals. Each one contained sequences of Enochian words arranged in a particular order, forming what Dee believed were formal addresses to the angels. In total, 19 of these calls were recorded. The first two are more general in nature, addressing the power and authority of the heavenly order. The remaining calls correspond to different regions of the spiritual world described during these sessions. When spoken aloud, they were believed to allow the speaker to communicate with the intelligences governing those realms, and if that belief was true, then Dee had not merely discovered a language, he had discovered a way of speaking to angels. The language was only one part of what the angels revealed. Alongside the words and invocations, Dee began recording something far more elaborate. Diagrams, large grids filled with letters arranged in precise patterns, known as the Enochian tablets. Each tablet is a grid of letters arranged in 12 rows and 13 columns. At first glance they resembled nothing but a collection of strange characters scattered across a page, but Dee believed the placement of every letter carried meaning, and that the arrangement of those letters concealed names that could be discovered by reading the grid in different directions. In total, 4 primary tablets were revealed. Each one corresponded to the classical elements believed to shape the world: earth, air, water, and fire. Later writers would refer to these elemental tablets as the watchtowers, vast regions of the angelic world populated by different orders of angels whose names could be discovered within the letters of the grids. Each tablet is also divided into 4 smaller sections, creating 16 regions across the tablets. Within those regions are different names that appear, depending on how the letters are read, with rows, columns, and intersecting sequences revealing different results. This meant a single tablet could contain dozens of names layered within the same grid. Brain hurting yet? Now let's talk about the ethers. The system describes 30 vast regions arranged beyond the world represented in the tablets. These regions are called the ethers. If the elemental tablets represent the world we can see and touch, the horizontal map of our universe, the ethers, represents the dimensions behind it. Imagine the universe as an onion with 30 layers. The outermost layer, the 30th ether, is the one closest to our physical reality. It is the densest and most human. As you move inward toward the first ether, the atmosphere changes. The laws of physics fall away, replaced by pure spiritual energy and increasingly alien intelligences. The names were recorded as Tex, Re, Bag, Zid, Des, Ern, Za, Pop, Zom, and so on, through all 30 levels. Forgive the pronunciation, it's been a while since I last spoke angel. Each name identified a particular ether and served as a focus when attempting to approach that realm. The ethers were connected directly to the calls. Remember them? The 19th call is associated with the ethers. By reciting this call while concentrating on the name of a particular ether, you're believed to gain access to visions connected with that level. The sequence always begins with the 30th ether and progresses upwards. Each step is thought to move closer to the highest levels of the angelic world. Dee recorded the existence and order of the ethers, but his journals contain very little direct exploration of them. Most of the accounts connected with the ethers appeared centuries later. In the early 20th century, Aleister Crowley conducted a series of rituals intended to explore the ethers one by one, working with the 19th call. He attempted to enter each level in sequence, recording the visions that followed. These records were later published as The Vision and the Voice, a text describing Crowley's experiences as he moved through the 30 ethers from Tex, the lowest level, upward to Lil, the highest. For later practitioners of Enochian magic, the ethers became the most significant parts of the system. They provided a series of realms that could be explored step by step. Unlike the tablets, which describe the arrangement of angels within the elemental world, the ethers describe a much larger ladder, extending far beyond it. By the 1580s, the angel sessions had been running for several years. Dee had filled thousands of pages with records of the communications. The language had been delivered, the tablets had been revealed, the ethers had been described, the work represented by a vast body of knowledge passed down from the angels. But the tone of the sessions began to shift. The communications became more personal. The instructions were no longer limited to cosmology or language. Instead, the angels began issuing commands directly specifically at Dee and Kelly. Some of these instructions involved ritual behavior. Others involved travel. Dee and Kelly spent several years moving across Europe, seeking patronage from nobles and emperors while continuing their sessions along the way. They visited cities across Poland and Bohemia, and eventually entered the court of the Holy Roman Emperor Rudolf II. It was during this period that the most controversial instruction appeared. In 1587, Kelly reported a message from the angel Madimi. Dee and Kelly were to share everything they possessed with one another. At first, this sounded like a demand for spiritual unity. The angels insisted that the two men must hold nothing back, no secrets, no property, no divisions between them. Then the instruction became more explicit. The command included their wives. Dee recorded the event in his diary with visible hesitation. He wrote about the instruction carefully and at length, struggling to interpret whether the command was literal or symbolic. Kelly, by contrast, insisted that the angels meant exactly what they said. For Dee, this created a terrible dilemma. If the angels truly were divine messengers, then refusing their command meant rejecting the very authority he had spent years trying to reach. Yet the instruction itself was deeply disturbing. The two men argued over the message for weeks. Eventually, Dee recorded that the command had been carried out. The details remain unclear, but the diary entry dated 22nd of May 1587 suggests that the wives were indeed involved in the arrangement the angels had demanded. From that point onward, the partnership began to fracture. Trust between the two men deteriorated rapidly. Dee continuing to believe the angelic communications were genuine, Kelly appeared increasingly uncomfortable with the direction the sessions had taken. Within a short time, the angel sessions stopped entirely. Kelly pursued alchemical work under the patronage of European nobles and eventually died while imprisoned after attempting to escape custody. Dee returned to England in 1589 to find his home in Mortlake looted and many of his books missing. The voices never returned, but the records that remained in Dee's journals would later become the foundation of what we now call Enochian magic. I know what you're thinking. Were they really conversations with angelic beings? Well, there are several theories. The most straightforward is that Edward Kelly was deceiving John Dee. Kelly was the scryer. He was the one staring into the stone. He was the one describing the figures, repeating the words, relaying the names, the commands, the diagrams. Dee never saw any of it for himself. Every message entered the record through Kelly's mouth. Suspicious. Could Kelly have been inventing them? There are reasons people have suspected him. Kelly had a murky reputation even before entering Dee's circle. He also had more to gain than Dee in practical terms. Dee was already respected. Kelly was still trying to become someone. Access to a man like Dee gave him status and opportunity. If he could convince one of the smartest men in England that angels were speaking through him, he would immediately become indispensable. But that theory raises problems of its own. The material is enormous, developed over years. If Kelly was making all of it up, then he was improvising an extraordinarily large and complicated body of material while keeping pace with a man who was trained to notice patterns, inconsistencies, and contradictions. It doesn't make deception impossible, but it makes it harder to accept as the full answer. Another possibility is that neither man was consciously lying. Under this theory, the sessions were real experiences, but not in the sense Dee believed. Kelly may have genuinely seen something in the stone, or at least believed that he did. Dee may have genuinely believed that the messages were external. The visions, the names, the voices, the instructions could have emerged through a kind of psychological shared process, shaped by expectation and the intense pressure both men brought into the room. It's a possibility that becomes easier to understand once you remember who these men were. Dee had spent years preparing himself for contact with the higher beings. He believed the divine knowledge existed. He believed angels were messengers between worlds. Kelly stepped into that environment as the man expected to see what Dee couldn't. One man wanted revelation, the other man became its instrument, a kind of arrangement where belief can become productive. Their sessions could have generated a reality powerful enough to shape both men without requiring either of them to consciously fabricate it. But there is another theory where the story darkens. What if it wasn't angels they were speaking to, but something demonic? It was embedded into the religious world they lived in. Visions could deceive, voices could lie. A being appearing bright, orderly and wise didn't prove that it came from heaven. In many religions, deception works precisely by appearing convincing at first. Falsehood often arrives dressed as revelation. The beings speak about divine matters. They present themselves as messengers. They reveal language, hierarchy, cosmology. The material looks elevated, intelligent. But as they continue, the tone shifts. The instructions become stranger, the demands become more personal, the communications begin intruding into the lives of the men receiving them. Eventually, they culminate in commands that strain trust, fracture the partnership, and leave a lasting damage. If the voices were demonic, the argument goes, then the deception would begin with fascination. Order first, mystery next, compulsion after that. And this theory would have felt very real to people at the time. To a 16th century Christian observer, the idea that hidden spirits might disguise themselves as angels was far more plausible than the idea that a new angelic language had been entrusted to an English scholar and his seer. And then, of course, there is the final possibility. That Dee was right. That all of it came from intelligences beyond our world. It's the hardest one for us to accept, yet it's the one that explains the story exactly as Dee understood it. In his mind, the question was never whether angels could speak. The real question was whether human beings could become worthy of hearing them. It's a bit unsettling, isn't it? None of these theories fully closes it. Fraud explains Kelly, but not the scale of the material. Shared belief explains the atmosphere, but not why the language feels so strange. Demonic deception explains the darker turn, but depends on accepting beliefs many of us no longer share. Genuine revelation explains the coherence of Dee's faith, but opens a door most would rather keep shut, which leaves the story in the same place it always has been. Somewhere between revelation and performance, between devotion and delusion, between heaven and something pretending to be heaven. For centuries we've looked to heaven, prayed to God and angels. We asked for guidance and protection, and in the late 1500s, something answered an English scholar. 4 centuries have passed since those sessions ended, but the language still exists. The calls can still be spoken. The tablets can still be arranged. The names can still be read from the grids exactly as Dee recorded them. Nothing about the system has been lost, which means the same possibility still exists today as it did in Dee's study at Mortlake. Someone can still stand in a quiet room, speak those words, and wait. And if those words are spoken again tonight, who answers? Good night.